did you always stay here, or did you leave for that and come back?
I just I really wanted to just stay one year like church.
Yeah.
Growing up, I didn't really. My parents just basically said something you should find ready for it, and my great aunt used to come here
How was that,
all the
right?
time, and I lived right in the neighborhood. I went one Sunday and I really liked it, so I just kept coming as much as I can. Yeah,
Do you guys have kids?
not yet. We're close. That's nice.
Yeah. So where do you live?
Richmond Lane, it's like 12 blocks that way.
What class is it? Pulling all the Stephen ministers out?
I got a couple of minutes after 7, so I think we should get this going, put this show on the road. Join me in prayer. God, we come before you at the end of this perfect autumn day to give you thanks for multiple blessings and also to petition your presence for this hour as we speak about things that tend to divide us in terms of our opinions and our passions. So we pray this evening for articulate speech and careful listening and tender kindness towards each other this night and through this election season that's to come. Through Christ we pray. Amen. So I called it, this is, by the way, is by popular request from the congregation. A few members asked us, so it happened this summer. It might have been right around the 4th of July. So the Supreme Court had just overturned Roe v. Wade. 6 people had been killed in Highland Park. Doug Mastriano from Pennsylvania wants to be governor there. And so people kept coming up to me and say, what do you think about this? So I thought, well, let's do 4 of them. We're going to do abortion, Christian nationalism, guns, and climate change. You notice that I'm paraphrasing Hamlet. Hamlet is a play which is beset with terrible things happening here and there. And at one point, I forget if it's Gertrude or Ophelia, somebody complains to Hamlet about his or her state, and he responds, when troubles come, they come not single spies, but in battalions. And on the 4th of July this summer, that's kind of the way I felt. When controversies come, they come not single spies, but they gang up on us. So Kathy asked me this afternoon, she says, she didn't know what I was talking about tonight. She said, so what incendiary device are you going to detonate in the Culbertson room tonight? And I said, we're going to talk about abortion because of the Dobbs decision that came down this spring from the Supreme Court. This is a screenshot. I couldn't make it work on Chrome, so this is just a screenshot. I can't really I demonstrate how it works, but I was telling somebody that if you will pull this up, this is the link. It's a site called Reproductive Rights, and this is abortion laws by state. So if you hover your cursor over every state, it gives you about 25 words on what that state's position is on abortion. The colors themselves tell you a lot. If you can't read the key, the blue is the most liberal states, like Illinois, expanded access. Yellow is protected. That means abortion rights are protected. The kind of orange color is not protected. The rights are not protective. And the milder red is hostile. to abortion rights, and the deeper red is abortion is illegal. So this is just so you could see what the map looks like. Pull it up at home if you're curious. And that's the link. Good news. We recently saw the nadir of abortion incidents in recent American history. In 2017, it dropped way down. You can see that the benchmark is 1973 when Roe v. Wade was decided. Abortions went way up from then, but have been dropping ever since to a low of 13.5 per thousand women in 2017. This might be good news and it might be bad news. It might be because we're winning the war through sex education and prophylactics. Could be that people are wising up to how to prevent unwanted pregnancies. It could also be people who are coming of age in 2017 through 2022 are having less sex. They don't even go out. They drink less, they take less drugs, and they have less sex. So maybe it's not such a great statistic. I don't know. So that's a couple of important statistics as we make our way through this. This is why this issue is so important to men and women in the United States and around the world today. 3.7 live births in the United States in 2021, 30 abortions, that's almost 25%. That is according to the Guttmacher Institute, which is an interpreter of abortion laws and abortion philosophies on the liberal side. Guttmacher is left-leaning. According to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, they have a smaller estimate, almost 100,000, a meaningfully smaller estimate. But you can see it's approaching 23 to 25% of all live births. There's a quarter of those equally abortion, okay? This is a little troubling. Less than 0.5% of babies born in the United States are voluntarily adopted. So what's happening is that families, mothers and fathers, are choosing to abort unborn children rather than to carry them to term and to offer them up to adoption to an adoption-thirsty world. Parents are looking for children to adopt, especially American children, right? So this is kind of we'll come back to this in a minute, but the paucity of adoptions in the United States is problematic, I think. I'll let you respond to that if you wish. This shocked me too. Half of all pregnancies in the United States are unintended. Some figures you get are 45%, but that's still high. Almost a quarter of American women will have an abortion before she reaches the age of 45. I thought that was shockingly high. Other sources say it's less than 20%. So there's a nice little book about, I think it's fewer than 140 pages by Kira Schlesinger. She's an Episcopalian priest, and it's very easy, very straightforward. So I relied heavily on this book while I was thinking about some of these things. We are terribly divided as Americans on the issue of abortion. The top bar there sees when you ask Americans whether abortion should be legal or illegal, 61% will say it should be legal most of the time, and 37% will say it will be illegal. In my mind, that's a substantial majority for the Roe v. Wade camp. That's just my opinion. But look at the difference between red and blue people. If you lean conservative, you are 72% against abortion. If you're moderate or liberal, you're 60% in favor of abortion rights. If you are Democratic, you are 80% in favor of abortion rights. I don't know what happened to my Republican. I guess the top is Republican. Yeah, right. Top is if you're a Republican, 60% agree that abortion shall be illegal. Yeah, that's. And then this summer, of course, Kansas shocked the country when a substantial majority of Kansans said that they want to maintain abortion rights. What does it say? 60% to 40%. Shocking. Very conservative state. Kansas voted for Trump, I bet, by 20 or 30 points. This is another surprising statistic. Catholics kind of track Americans in their attitudes towards abortion. That is to say, the opinions and the pronouncements of the magisterium make no difference to Catholics. They live their lives. They use birth control the same way Protestants and secularists do. 68% of Catholics were happy with Roe v. Wade. So here's a proposal for a Christian stance on abortion. This is a picture of the Planned Parenthood site that they just put down in the St. Louis suburbs, 5 miles from Missouri, where abortion's almost impossible to get. So we're going to say that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. No surprise. That's what we're hoping for when we're coming at this from the stance of the Christian church. So we think that abortion should be safe. So that banning or restricting abortion really doesn't lessen the incidence of abortion. It just makes it more dangerous, right? So there were almost as many abortions in 1969 as there were in the post-Roe v. Wade territory. So what happens is you just drive them underground. And so when Roe v. Wade mandated legal abortion nationally, it didn't increase the number of abortions. It just made them safe and legal. So that's what we're hoping for when we're Christian. Safe, they should be legal. Just a reminder, 5 of the 7 justices who voted in the majority on Roe v. Wade were appointed by Republican presidents. That was a different era for Americans. Republicans and Democrats talked to each other, and it didn't make much difference if you were appointed to the court by LBJ or by Richard Nixon. Now, Christians, I think, this is my opinion, should affirm that the state has a right and a responsibility to regulate abortion. That is to say, this is not morally of no difference, of no importance, right? What we're talking about when we are talking about aborting an unborn child is that a defenseless living creature is being harmed. And so the state has a right and a duty to overlook how Americans are treating their unborn children, right? That's my opinion. Now, here are some stances on when life begins. This is where things get tricky. Life begins at conception. More and more Americans in the evangelical church and in the Catholic Church want to say that the minute egg and sperm unite, we have a human being. Other people say that life begins at quickening. This is when the mother can feel her child moving within her. It often happens at about 20 weeks of pregnancy. Other people say life begins at viability. I think that's what Roe v. Wade said, right? You could abort a child until she or he was viable. And then others say that life begins at birth. In my opinion, Christians are going to avoid the extremes. That is to say, it might be true in some non-meaningful sense that life does begin as soon as a few cells clump together and begin to take the shape of a human being. So it might be true that life begins at conception, but we're not going to, I don't think Christians should want to ban an abortion from the moment of conception. Nor, I think this is clear, should Christians want for abortion to be legal close to birth, after the time of viability. Anybody want? By the way, if you want to comment anytime, just raise your hand or just interrupt. We can be rude here. But Kathy's going to bring you a mic if you want to say anything. Shh.
I hate to interrupt you, Bill.
No, that's okay.
I'm pretty loud. I don't know if I need this thing. I just wanted to share something that I experienced when I was in college. I had a roommate who was she was an exchange student from Spelman College, which is a historical black college. And unbeknownst to any of us, she came to us. And this is 1965, before Roe versus Wade. And she was pregnant, and she said she was going to visit her aunt in Chicago for the weekend. She came home to the dorm, and I heard her screaming in the middle of the night, "Help me, help me." She had an illegal back alley abortion, and she was hemorrhaging and almost died and could never have children again. So I just thought I'd pass along a horror story about when Roe versus Wade wasn't even available.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's helpful. Oh, by the way, welcome to anybody who's live streaming. That's why we're using the microphone, because nobody who's live streaming could hear Suzanne without the amplification. So welcome to all of you if you're not in the room. I think it's crucial to a moral Christian stance on abortion to remember that there is a difference between a fetus and a person. We'll get back to this in a minute, but one of the moves of the anti-abortion rights crowd is to treat the fetus in the same way that we treat a human being. And I think we need to make distinctions between a developing person and someone who's already here and sentient and conscious. Anybody want to disagree with that? The Reverend Schlesinger says, is a fertilized egg really a person in the same way that you are a person? And she asks the question, when does personhood begin? And notice the language she uses here. We can talk about life begins at conception. That's probably true. But does personhood begin at conception? It's more than semantics. It's more than vocabulary, I think. She uses the word personhood. Does it begin at conception, when the embryo implants, when there's brain waves or a heartbeat, when pain can be felt, viability? The discussion of fetal personhood centers on the fetus, the embryo, even the fertilized egg, at the expense of the woman herself. And when you use this kind of language, you're hearkening back to a time when women were fields for crops, their soil or host. Two important overarching categories that Christians believe in want to show us that we think as Christians, as the Christian church, that the state has an interest in overseeing abortion. We believe that God is the author of life. God is for freedom over slavery and for flourishing over oppression. God loves into being everything that is, including humankind. So that's creation. And when we start to talk about salvation, we notice, especially in the Hebrew Bible, but also in the Christian Bible, that God is always on the side of the oppressed. So in Egypt, God says to Pharaoh, "Let my people go," and then leads them eventually to the promised land. When David's distant son Jesus comes along to Bethlehem centuries later, he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." Those who are oppressed. That is God's prejudice, the Hebrew and the Christian. Weak and defenseless, God has a bias for. I love the way Ron Dworkin, a philosopher who's gone now, insistent to hold a profound conviction that it's intrinsically wrong in human life, and yet believe that a decision whether to end human life in early pregnancy must nevertheless be left to the pregnant woman whose conscience is most directly connected to the choice and who has the greatest stake in it. To paraphrase and abbreviate Dr. Dworkin, choosing abortion can be at one time both tragic and yet moral and Christian, and in some cases the least bad of bad choices. Anybody want to quarrel with Dr. Dworkin here? That's why this issue is so tough. We can admit that it's tragic and yet insist that it must be made, a decision like this. It's an article in the Atlantic 3 years ago, before the Supreme Court took on Dobbs. She says, this is the author of the article, I often speak to people who might say something like, I believe in a legal right to a safe and accessible abortion. But on a one-to-one level, I believe in encouraging people to choose to carry pregnancies to term. You see how a lot of these thinkers are at least implying that we should leave this choice up to the mother? Gia Tolentino in the New Yorker is warning us about some dark days ahead. I mean, she is referencing obliquely Texas's new law, which enables citizens to sue each other if they are trying to get an abortion or assist an abortion. So they've deputized the entire state of Texas to go seek people who need an abortion. Doctors and pharmacists and clinic people, volunteers and friends and family members, Uber drivers, people who drive from Missouri to Illinois to get an abortion, all of these people are at risk in the new Dobbs era. Kind of gratifying. 7% of Texans and 54% are opposed. Somehow, all across the country, minorities are making decisions for majorities. You've read about women who miscarry and then are suspected by the state of doing it on purpose or failing to do everything they can to protect their pregnancy, their unborn child. And Ms. Tolentino fears that we're in a new era where search histories, browsing histories, text messages, GPS things, Venmo, period tracking apps. One of these authors said your phone knows you're pregnant before your friends do because your phone collects all your information. So if you're looking for pregnancy tests, if you're looking at diapers, anything, your phone knows before anybody else does.
Nice dog.
Yeah, isn't that a great dog?
You have a dog in there.
I did that on purpose.
I'm sure you do.
By their own admission, the ultimate goal of many anti-abortion activists is the concept of fetal personhood. An unborn child with a detectable heartbeat, which usually occurs around 6 weeks of pregnancy, before many women even know they're pregnant, will become, by law, a member of the species Homo sapiens. By extension, by logic, this means that every abortion turns into a murder. That's their goal. In Georgia, the Living Infants Fairness and Equality Act allows unborn children to receive child support and tax credits and to be part of the census. Doesn't mean anything.
Katie can vote twice. Or 3 times.
I don't know. The federal government doesn't count fetuses, so it doesn't count. But this is a law in Georgia. One pregnant woman argued that she could use the HOV lanes. She got a ticket anyway. So you've heard the case of Caitlin Bernard, the Indianapolis OBGYN who performed an abortion on a 10-year-old Ohio girl who had to travel there to get an abortion. She was pregnant as a result of a rape. Dr. Bernard has a tattoo on her left foot, a picture of a coat hanger over the words, "Trust women." And again, she, along with Ms. Tolentino and Emma Green from The Atlantic, they are implying that these decisions are best left to the ones whose lives are most impacted by them, who are experiencing this literally, viscerally, existentially. Politicians people who are uncomfortable with abortion care have usually never been in these situations. You know what makes me queasy? If you're curious, if you're with me on this, go home and Google, for instance, the Indiana legislature. Room full of legislators, lawmakers. They're all old white men. We got a bunch of old white men making decisions for young women of color. Maybe you heard the story of Robin Utz. She's from St. Louis. She is married to Jim happily for 11 years. They tried to get pregnant for 4 years. They took 2 rounds of IVF, and finally they got pregnant. And everything was going swimmingly. So swimmingly, they named the unborn child Grace Pearl. But at 20 weeks, the result of an ultrasound or some kind of an anatomy scan, they discovered that she would never be able to live. If she survived the rest of the pregnancy, she would die upon childbirth. And so Robin knew instantly that she needed to get an abortion to save this unborn child all this pain and herself all this agony, emotional and physical agony. And so she lived in St. Louis. Missouri is one of the toughest states of all on abortion. So she says, obtaining our abortion was one of the most insulting, degrading experiences of my life, simply because the Missouri state laws are designed to make it humiliating, to be judgmental. This saying appears on the first page of the information packet in the state of Missouri. The life of each human being begins at conception. Abortion will terminate the life of a separate, unique, living human being. I argue with them. They might be right. In their own minds, they are right. But these are theological and philosophical statements and legal ones, right? This is what a pregnant woman who needs an abortion for all the right reason has to see before she undergoes the procedure. They make them do ultrasounds before they get the procedure. Robin Utz has had probably 20 ultrasounds seeing her unborn child. They went on to have another baby named Hannah, by the way. Abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. Did you know there was a Democrats for Life of America organization? These are blue, liberal people who want to defend the rights of the unborn. This guy's name is Charles Kamosi. He is a moral theologian at Fordham University, which means he must be Catholic. And he says he prefers to use the term prenatal child rather than fetus, because he says the word fetus is dehumanizing. It's scientific, it's biological, it's not emotive, and it's not human. And he points out that doctors never talk to a woman about her fetus, except in the abortion context, when we need to dehumanize what's there. A doctor at an ultrasound is always going to talk to the mother about a baby. Right? So it's something to think about, those of us who are on the left-leaning side of things. Now, this is interesting. I like these guys. This says, if you can't read it, said these are the churches that support abortion rights. Judaism in multiple forms, the Unitarian Universalists, the United Church of Christ, and my mother church, the Presbyterian Church. Been this way since at least Roe versus Wade. Churches have been fairly progressive. The ELCA, the United Methodist Church, and the Church also have some beautiful, wise things to say about a Christian response to abortion. And almost all of them point out that as a solution to a problem pregnancy, abortion should always be a last resort. We always remember that abortion might be the lesser of two evils, but it is almost always an evil. Yes? Can we agree about that? Necessary, but perhaps evil. Pro-choice churches encourage mothers with problem pregnancies to carry the child to term. As I pointed out before, adoption is terribly underused in the United States. Less than 0.5% go to adoptive parents. what did I say, 18,000 babies? I like what the ELCA says about this issue. In a word, it says that up to the time of viability, the ELCA does not want the United States of America or state governments to prohibit abortion. The ELCA wants to leave this decision up to mother and father of the unborn child. When it comes to the time of viability, the church supports prohibitions of abortions. The ELC realizes that the United States government has a right and a responsibility to interfere in these decisions. But if the mother's life is threatened, or if the unborn child's life is threatened, then abortion should be permissible. I like this is a nice little synopsis by the evangelical church, which is kind of mid-range between the Presbyterians and the Baptists and the Catholics. So abortion should be rare. Now these are not rhetorical questions. I hope you'll weigh in on this. Should abortion be used for gender selection? Is it used for gender selection, do you think? Did you hear what John said? I'll just repeat it for you, John. John, I asked if abortion is used for gender selection, and John jumped right in with China. Good point. Yes, dear.
Hold on just a second.
See, it's very impractical to choose according to gender, because basically the reason why 51% of the population is always female is because you need females to carry the baby for 9 months, and then you've got the nursing, and then you've got everything else. Now, let's face it, men can do their half in a moment, and then so you always need more females because they're going to carry the baby, feed the baby, do all that other stuff while the men go off to war or what have. Well, literally. I mean, and then the men come home and are good fathers, but logistically, that's not very smart.
Think of the world in 1,000 years. Will there still be a male gender? Y'all don't need us. Well, I mean, in 20 generations, we're all going to find out remarkably creative ways to produce new human beings. And we won't need men, right? We probably will always need women. Maybe not.
That's assuming that the only reason you're alive is to reproduce.
Well, I'm not saying if it's right or wrong. I'm just saying, did anybody watch Westworld? Westworld is about when flesh and blood is dispensable. Oh, you're only in season 3, Chris? Did I spoil anything for you? I just finished the last episode of the current season. Oof. Should abortion be used for family planning? Is it? Some twin questions. What if you can't afford another child? What if you're a school teacher married to a plumber? So you make $150,000 a year together and you have 4 children. And they all want to go to college. And you're 45 years old and you find out you're pregnant.
What happened to contraception?
Well, this is a question we answer after that. It's too late, right? It's a good question, but...
What about adoption? Right? Adoption.
Yeah.
Right.
Jeff wants to know, if you're 45 and have 4 college tuitions to pay and you suddenly have a new infant, why not carry it to term and make another couple happy?
That's not easy for a woman to do.
Well, it's not easy. I mean, obviously, abortion is the most expedient thing you can do. So are we talking about expedience, or are we talking about the right thing to do? Pardon me?
It's a very hard decision for a woman to make. I don't think women who choose abortion do so lightly.
I'll
No,
repeat that. I don't think that women who seek abortion do so lightly. I think it's a horrendous decision to make to end a pregnancy. I never had to make that decision, but I can imagine it must be terribly difficult. I worked with teenage dropouts in Coney Island, Brooklyn. And our whole idea there was to use contraception to prevent all these unwanted pregnancies. But here were these young girls with these babies that were not being cared for properly. I remember one little baby was just the most adorable little thing. And he was bright and shining, and his mother got into drugs. And that baby just laid there. I took the diaper off the baby, and it was raw. So, you see things and you think, it's not so simple.
Yeah, Jeff, that's a wise thing to remind us about. That there are other options than abortion. The thing that where it gets tricky is you can think that's the right thing to do, and maybe in your family that's what you would do, but it's hard for you to impose that on a 19-year-old kid. You know what I mean?
So my comment is, you pose the question as should abortion be used for gender selection for family planning? But I think the more relevant question, certainly in our country today, is should the government be making those judgments for women, not whether we are making individual choices in our own personal lives, even in our own advocate lives. The question should be, should the government say whether you can use abortion for family planning? Should the government be the one to say that you can't use it if you can't afford another child? That seems to me to be the relevant and important question.
That's what I was trying to say. Thanks, Chris. That's a paraphrase of you said it clear. By the way, we can believe an adoption is a better solution than abortion for an unwanted child, but did you know that childbirth is 30 times more dangerous than abortion? 30 times.
And just the cost of carrying that pregnancy through.
And the wear and tear on a woman's body to carry the pregnancy through. That's not any small.
What if you're 45 or 50 years old and you get pregnant?
But it's true. Many pregnancies today are with older women. Women have been putting off having babies till later in life. And with each year that passes, there are also risks to pregnancy with older women. Behind you.
Thank you, Kathy.
So just full disclosure. So my two children are adopted, but having said that, I, as well as my two children who are adopted, believe that there is a role for abortion. I think it's the extremes, at 9 months or, at conception, right? So those have to be eliminated. But I think, really, if you were to poll Americans, the real question is, when does life really begin, and when does abortion, when do you tip over until you're really affecting a human life, and when are you, I don't know, not affecting a human life, I guess. So, I think it's really the gray area that I think we're probably, most of us are all concerned about.
Yeah. Did you hear what Nancy said? We're back to the concept of the least bad choice, as she put it.
I think that one of the sad ironies is that so many of the evangelicals who have been working for decades to try to overthrow Roe versus Wade is because they really believe that they are doing the work of God in saving a child. And that is one of the things that makes it so difficult to talk about. And yet, when you think about what one of God's greatest gifts to us, though, is the freedom of choice. And we are not offering that to women who are in that situation by taking away this right.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that's tricky about this is everything you've said, Bill, I'm quite allied with. Roe v. Wade was adopted when I was in law school, so it was obviously a decision that got a tremendous amount of attention and analysis. Justice Blackmun sat at a library table for months trying to figure out how to divide up 9 months in a way that was rational. First trimester, second trimester, third trimester, trying to do the sculpting legally that allowed for choice at a certain stage and less choice at the next stage and even less choice at the third stage. The thing that's tricky from a legal standpoint, in my view, is where in the Constitution does the federal government, has the federal government established a principle that states don't have the freedom to set the rules for this? And so if your view is that government should be deprived of the ability to restrict abortions, you have to find something to point to justify that position. And there are a collection of decisions involving contraceptives, involving gay rights. I've got a son who's gay and married and has a child, so that really touches home. The obviously abortion is another good example. The penumbra of legal freedom that is given to people to protect their privacy and to exercise rights within a private sphere is, I think, extremely important, but very hard to craft from a legal standpoint. And what you've got is, I don't think it's so much a function of right-wing white men imposing this. I think it's rigorous legal analysis that's flawed in not taking into consideration society and what's called for to have a just and fair society. And I think the overturning of Roe v. Wade was a huge mistake, that what Blackmun did was very wise, was in place for 50 years, and I think had become established and had created a calm water environment in our society, and it was completely blown up. And now it's back to the states where you've got all these right-wing states that, for some reason, I don't understand why a state that's 40% in favor of prohibiting abortion and 60% against it is nevertheless imposing laws. I'm hoping that's just a transitional stage. But legally, this is a tough, gnarly thing to deal with.
Thanks for it. That's very wise. So I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yep.
But you're a lawyer, so I'm going to.
Okay. Scott's a lawyer too, and he's a much better lawyer than I am.
He can answer if he wants. So you're pointing out the shakiness of the Roe v. Wade decision.
Yeah.
It doesn't rest firmly and comfortably on anything constitutional. So Sam Alito might be right. He might be exact. It was a
Harry Blackmun or Sam Alito?
Sam Alito might be right.
Said Harry Blackmun.
I thought Harry Blackmun did a great job, but Sam Alito 50 years later second guessed him.
But you're suggesting Alito might be right. That Roe v. Wade really has no basis in the Constitution. It was always a faulty decision. That's what they've been saying for 50 years.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying there are Alito. That would definitely be what Alito and his cadres would say. That it was flawed. And back in 1973, people said that. Where's this coming from? Where in the Constitution do you get into 3 trimesters?
All right, I'll take the microphone.
Sure, go for it. Help me help.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that insight, Fritz.
Yeah, we don't necessarily want to turn this into a legal class, right? But Fritz is saying some interesting things that I've been thinking about as I'm sitting here as well. And you can be pro-choice, but agree that but believe that Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided. And in fact, Ruth Bader Ginsburg herself believed that. And I've done a lot of reading about this since the Dobbs decision, listen to podcasts by legal scholars, and there are liberal legal scholars and conservative legal scholars who believe Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided for two reasons. One, there's no right to privacy in the Constitution. Number two, this trimester division that Blackmun came up with is arbitrary and as the years went by, not consistent with science and when fetuses were viable and all of that. So I think that's an important point, that pro-choice does not necessarily mean pro Roe v. or pro Roe v. Wade. There are people on both sides of the aisle, but as Fritz said, where I come down on this as a lawyer is that was 50 years ago. There's a doctrine of stare decisis under the law. People, 50 years is a long time, and people had been living under that regime and basing their lives and activities on the existence of Roe v. Wade and that right in the Constitution, and that right was expanded to other areas, as Fritz pointed out. And so Roe v. Wade may have been wrongly decided 50 years ago, but that was 50 years ago, and in my opinion, the decision should not have been overturned, even though I think there's an intellectual case to be made that it was wrongly decided.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay, so as an 82-year-old grandmother, obviously a liberal, but one of the things that it's not just about white men in the United States. Just think about what else is happening right now in the world. A woman in Iran was murdered because her hijab didn't cover. The morality police were after her. I'm working with Afghan refugees, and they're here and now in Afghanistan. The Taliban says girls can't go to school. And in this country, we have some of the same things, sort of this male privilege. I don't know what to call it. I won't call it that because there's too many nice males in this room. But the other point is somehow there's been this sort of privilege that white men can tell girls, women, what to do. And when you see the Taliban, and when you see the goons in Afghanistan, and when you see some of the goons in this country, it's a very scary thing. And as a woman, I'm thinking, we are going backwards, and I don't like it. That's the voice of a grandmother.
Thank you, Bev. Anybody watch The Handmaid's Tale? Personally, I call Clarence Thomas Commander Thomas. 90% of Down syndrome unborn children are aborted. This was shocking to me. Is that the right thing to do? If you find out in your pregnancy that you're carrying a Down syndrome child, what is the moral thing to do?
I know of a case like this, and the young couple who already had 2 children felt they couldn't take care of one more. They weren't financially stable, they weren't emotionally stable, they were struggling just to get by, and so when the diagnosis of Down syndrome happened, they said, it would wreck our family. We're not strong enough. We are barely making it with 2 kids.
Chris wants to say something.
It's none of my business.
There's way more wisdom in that canard than we realize. All this is pointing, this question, abort a Down syndrome fetus, it's pointing to the fact that the family needs to make that decision, right? However, on the other hand, I know some very faithful people steeped in the church's existence. I think they were childless when this happened. And I don't know if it was Down syndrome, something very, very serious, where the child would never walk or talk. They found this out before the child was born. And the husband and the wife got together and they looked at themselves, you know, maybe he was a lawyer and she was a doctor, whatever. They said, if not us, who? We've practically been chosen to do this difficult thing. That's what they said to themselves. The family that Bev mentioned probably made a good decision for their family. This family made a good decision. They said to themselves, look, we have the resources and we have the maturity and the wisdom to do this. Why not? And so, again, it's just telling us these are familial, not governmental decisions. I guess that's my presentation. That's timely. Didn't realize that was my last slide, but last comments.
Tonight's topic will bleed into next week's.
Are you a plant?
So, I don't know the answer to this, but I noticed through your presentation you didn't discuss any biblical references. Is there anything in the Bible that could guide this discussion from a Christian perspective?
That's a great question, Scott. One of the churches that provides guidance, one of the pro-choice denominations that provides guidance on the issue of abortion, says right up front, the Bible has nothing to say about this issue. That's literally true. Obviously, abortions were performed 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, but the Bible chooses not to talk about it and has no wisdom for us. There is that wonderful psalm. It's actually my favorite psalm, despite where I stand on this issue. You formed me together in my mother's womb. You knit together my inward parts. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. That is to say, God knows us before we're born. We are part of God's plan. We have been planned since the springs of the sea started sprouting up. And when we're in utero, God knows who we are. You have written out the days for me when as yet none of them existed. So God's love and God's providence precedes our birth and postdates our death. So there is Psalm 139. Go home and use it devotionally if you feel like it. Can anybody think, there's also the 7th commandment, or is it the 8th, 6th? Thou shalt not kill. Kill, in that, the Hebrew word that's translated kill, means to murder. It doesn't mean to shoot down an enemy soldier. It doesn't mean to kill in self-defense. And it doesn't mean to take the life of an unborn child. Can anybody else think of anything? We might pause to consider, Scott, just to keep going with you. Jesus was an unwanted pregnancy. He was born to an unwed teenage mother. He was a bastard. As far as the world was concerned, he had no earthly father.
That's your opinion.
No, it's not. It's the Bible's story. It's not my opinion.
Well, I disagree with that.
Well, then you disagree with the Bible. You're not disagreeing with me.
I'm disagreeing with
It doesn't say that Jesus was an unwanted pregnancy by his mother.
Right.
It says
Yeah,
that
Joseph stepped up and said, "I want." Yeah.
Well, but what did Joseph say first?
I don't know,
But he was
terrified.
He was just a sperm donor.
He was not a sperm
That's
donor.
right.
No, Joseph
Forgot that
was
part.
the father. I mean, he was the one who took care of them and taught him carpentry.
Yeah. We don't know what Mary thought. We know
Well,
some
yes,
of the
we
things
do.
she said.
Yeah. Thank you, God, is what she said. But she had to get there, and Joseph really had to get there. Joseph wanted to put her away.
He's my type of man.
He ended up being our type of man. But you see my point, right? These are a young couple. Mary was probably 14. And so shame and disgrace were coming down on her head. And one solution to this might have been to end what was going on, but she didn't do that. She had faith in God and in her fiancé,
don't know what the procedures were in those days.
No. Good point.
I would just like to end my comments by saying I hope that with the end of Roe versus Wade, that back alley abortions, they're going to happen again. And this is going to cause lives of people, not the fetus, not the baby, unborn baby, but of the mother.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's important that we have safe, available abortions.
Someone guessed that if abortion becomes illegal nationwide, there will be a 21% increase in maternal deaths at childbirth. That's shocking.
Aren't there some companies in Texas that have said they would pay for women to have abortions in other states?
Travel, for sure.
Oh, I thought that I had understood that there were some companies that had said they would offer their female employees travel benefits. Yeah.
Which may or may not be permissible under Texas law.
Yeah, they might be.
Yeah. It's aiding and abetting.
That's why I brought it up.
Yeah.
Somebody will sue for 10 grand.
Okay. Sorry.
Hang on just a second, Suzanne. We'll get you. Go ahead, Maria.
I just had a question for all of us to ponder. I was looking at your slides, and I'm in complete agreement with what you're saying, that we believe that abortion should be available and legal, but it also should be rare. So how do we reconcile that? Because you said, I mean, there are very high incidences of abortion. So how do we reconcile that? I don't know if there's an answer, but it's something to think about.
Yes, thank you, Maria. Very true. Someone pointed out, Scott, were you going to say something? No, you're just holding the microphone.
I will say something when you're done with this point.
I was just going to say, you're talking about the arbitrariness of the trimester divisions, but you got to start somewhere, right? And Justice Blackmun, I never thought about this way before, but Roe v. Wade was a compromise between those who thought life began at conception and those who want to say that life begins at birth. And so 23 weeks. Why not put a stake in the ground there?
Oh, I just was going to say, I don't mean to wrap up the conversation, but I wanted to thank Bill for having the courage to talk about this issue. It's a very hot issue, but it's important for us to have a Christian perspective on this topic and the others, so I'm really looking forward to the other weeks as well, and thank you, Bill, for doing this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. If you're curious about the Christian guidance on the issue of abortion, any of the churches, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, the United Church of Christ, the Presbyterian Church USA, the United Methodist Church, and the Unitarian Universalist Association. Google any of those, and you'll have maybe anywhere from 10 to 100 pages of guidance on it if you want it.
Is that our homework?
Yeah. It's for the interested. Further discussion, extra credit. Come back next week for Christian nationalism. What? Yeah, what do you mean by that? What do you mean?
I mean that the driving force behind getting Roe v.